Housing TV Africa, your first in housing news. 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 Housing TV Africa, your first housing.
Join us on a captivating experience through the dynamic world of town planning in Nigeria as we delve into the visionary projects and insights of top experts, witnessing the remarkable transformation of spaces into extraordinary communities. Immerse yourself in engaging discussions with leading town planning professionals as you address critical issues and offer innovative solutions to empower communities. Experience the pulse of the cities of tomorrow on City Pulse, a weekly television program presented by the National Institute of Town Planners. Gain exclusive behind-the-scenes looks and discover groundbreaking strategies shaping the urban landscape. Don't miss a beat. Showing weekly on Housing TV Africa. Star Times Channel 149.
The city is getting too loud. You need a home. Home is loud. Peace and tranquility. It's Housing TV Africa. Housing TV Africa, your first in housing news. The city is getting too loud. You need a home. Home is loud. Peace and tranquility. Is Housing TV Africa. Housing TV Africa, your first housing news. The city is getting too loud. A home. Home. Stop. Peace. And tranquility. Home is housing in Africa. Housing team in Africa. Your first in housing news.
Then when the program starts,
Wait, it's getting too loud. In a home. Home. Stop. Peace. And tranquility. Housing TV Africa. Housing TV Africa. Your first in housing. The city is getting too loud. You need home. Home is loud. Peace and tranquility. Home is housing TV Africa. Housing TV Africa. Home is loud. Peace and tranquility. Home is housing TV Africa. Housing TV Africa. Your first in housing news. The city is getting too loud.
Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on
Housing TV Africa, your first in housing news. 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 Housing TV Africa, your first in housing news.
Yes, the moment we have been waiting for has come. I'm so pleased to be here and be the anchor for this program, this very important program today. My name is Festus Adebayo. And I'll be the guide for you on this very important discussion that have to do with the real estate investment in Nigeria. Today, I'd like to welcome, first and foremost, how to know the real estate investment in Nigeria. Today, I would like to welcome all the viewers who are watching us on Housing TV Africa, and those who are connected, who are watching us on on the Zoom platform, or if you are watching us on any of our social media platform, on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. I am very pleased to be here to be your anchor at this very important time. Our focus on this discussion today is Nigerian new tax reforms. What effect will it have on the real estate sector? I think in the last 1 week, it has been a matter of discussion from one state to another on what benefits are Nigerians going to have on this bill if passed to law by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Ahmed Bola Tinubu. The northern state governors have said no. And just yesterday, the Nigeria Economic Council also said no to the bill. So today, the housing sector in Nigeria has decided to come together and look at what benefit would this bill be to her if passed to law, and what are the other side of it if the bill is passed to law. I would like to read a little bit information about this bill before I unveil the special guest speaker who will be doing justice to this discussion. Understanding Tinubu Tax Bill of Relief. That is what they call it. They call it Bill of Relief. Tax Bill of Relief. The transmission of 4 bills that aim to overhaul Nigeria's tax system to the National Assembly was said 2 weeks ago by President Tinubu. Some have expressed fears that the bill may speculate proposals calling for a raise in tax rates in a way that will further burden the citizens. Some Nigerians have rejected the news with mixed feelings, while others have chosen to wait for detail before commenting on the development. The 4 executive bills seek to tidy up the fiscal policy and legislation environment in the country. They are Nigeria Tax Bill, Nigeria Tax Administration Bill, Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill, and Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill. This bill seeks to translate the recommendation of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform, shared by our friend Taiwo Oyedele, into implementable legislative framework for the benefits of Nigerians. It is common knowledge that one factor which has continued to impede efficiency in Nigeria's tax system and has negatively impacted revenue is multiplicity of taxes. President Tinubu in his inauguration speech has pledged to address the issue of multiple taxation and remove all hurdles against investment in the country. Multiplicity of taxes is one of the issues that Nigeria tax bill seek to hang. This will certainly bring relief to corporate Nigeria. We shall be hearing whether that is true at the end of our today's discussion. Imposition of tax by more than one agency or level of government without a shadow of doubt constitutes a so-called on businesses, especially micro and small businesses, as well as individuals. With the best personality to look into this matter, there's no other person than Dr. Biodun Adedipe, the founder and chief consultant of B. Adedipe Associates Limited, BAA Consult. With over 43 years of postgraduate work and professional experience in university teaching, investment banking, project finance, management, and financial consult, as well as leadership in business and not-for-profit organizations. Biodun has had an illustrious career that took him through the University of Lagos, Enterprise Consulting Group, the World Bank, Africa Region, International Merchant Bank PLC, and First City Monument Bank. So it's my pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Abiodun Adedipe, our guest speaker for this very important discussion today.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Adebayo. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation today.
Mr. Abiodun, hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly. Very clearly.
Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so very much. I'm happy to be with you this morning and also with your distinguished audience to discuss this important topic. Very timeless.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So I put together also a deck of slides.
Thank you so much.
Which I would like to share.
Thank you.
Okay.
So for all the viewers, yes. All right. So it is time for us to call the guest speaker to start the discussion. And after that, we'd like to take some calls from those who are watching us on television and those who are also listening to us through the Zoom. If you have questions, please prepare your question. You can send some messages to us on Zoom. You can send some message to us also on social media. So Dr. Abiodun, it is your time to tell us about this bill. And what likely effects is likely to have in good, in bad, if passed to law by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Adebayo. I think I will start from this perspective that personally I've been involved in this tax conversation in Nigeria, especially the problem of multiple taxation since 1997. So it's a problem and a challenge we have had in the economy for decades now, no longer talking about years. So what this has translated to is that over these many years, different administration governments have come and left. And we've had this as a conversation, especially within the business space, that no government in particular took that, let me say, taking the gauntlet to deal with this tortuous issue of multiple taxation. This is perhaps the first time we have a comprehensive review of it all and see how we can bring everything together and not only come in as executive bills, but harmonized into a tax code that become a reference for Nigeria going forward. And so my approach to the conversation is to first of all remind ourselves about our sector, the real estate sector, because that is the context of our conversation. Of course, we know fully well the challenges in there, and of course, the central role that government plays anytime you look at the real estate sector anywhere around the world. But primarily, what we look at there is that we have today an estimated world population of roughly just about 8 billion people. But by 2050, which is just 26 years down the road, it's projected to be about 9.7 billion people. But within that period also, it's expected that the percentage requiring housing would have increased significantly to 62.8%. And of course, looking at that, what number will be in the urban areas, what percentage will be in the rural areas. Then, of course, within that context as well, we come back home to Nigeria. What is the issue with us in Nigeria? Population is growing significantly, estimated at 229.1 million people, okay, growing annually at 2.35% as of June this year. But then there are many housing challenges. We've talked about this repeatedly, okay, estimated 28 million housing units of housing deficit. But then we look at the global market, what is the size? Looking at it now from the perspective of investors, and also those who play within that space along the value chain, whether they are brokers, whether they are developers, whether they are financiers or risk underwriters, and whichever way we want to look at it. But within that global market, you are looking at an estimated market of $3.8 trillion in 2022, which is estimated to grow to $5.85 trillion by 2030. Now, that is quite huge. Coming back home to Nigeria, for this year, the real estate market is estimated at $2.42 trillion in Nigeria. Of course, residential accounted for about $2.08 trillion, which is quite huge. So that gives us an idea of how big the market is in Nigeria. But the question now is, can it be bigger? Yes, no doubt. Then we now talk about drivers of that growth, essentially population. As I said earlier on, huge number, more urbanized than before, then the housing deficit. But we now look at that sector itself. How important is it in our economy? Then we look at number one, the real estate sector in Nigeria in terms of contribution to our GDP is among the top 7 in the last 12 years in Nigeria, consistently. That means it is important to the economy. And of course, if we look at the contributions to our GDP, steadily above 5%, especially in the last 2 years thereabout. So let me say a few things about tax culture in context, because if we don't understand what tax culture is, it is difficult to relate with the need for and the nature of the reforms we are discussing today. Now, I was privileged to speak at the International Tax Conference organized by CITN, early this year, and I was invited to talk about the tax culture. What is it like globally? What is it like at the national level? What is it like at the local level? What are the issues therein? Number one is that tax culture is about citizens' attitude to and their behavior in tax compliance. Now, all of this will become relevant later when I come to my conclusion on this matter. So the global challenge that this is everywhere is the fact that people don't always want to voluntarily comply with tax provisions. Okay, so I bet the nature of the challenge varies across different geographies and jurisdictions. But of course, expanding that in Nigeria is important for our economy at this point in time, especially with our history, where hydrocarbons accounted for most of our foreign earnings on the one hand, and also accounts for the bulk of government revenue on the other hand. Now, the chance, in my own perspective, that we have with the current Tinubu administration, which of course is known for reforms, is opportunity to address Nigeria's vulnerability to external shocks that are caused by the vagaries of the international oil market, especially since the late 1970s. So now, in dealing with this, I remember I also spoke at the tax conference sometime in 2019, and some of the issues I raised then were that, number one, the role that taxes play in economic development is quite complicated, and of course has been subject to much debate. But there's no doubt that there's a connection between tax policies and practices and the quality of development that we get in an economy. Now, in mapping the tax culture, typically we ask the following 4 questions, and I want the audience to take note of this. Number one, why won't citizens voluntarily comply with tax regulations? The second question, why do governments tend to place tax as revenue source ahead of tax as business facilitator? Then number 3, why do government tax officials seek opportunities to collude with taxpayers to either avoid or evade tax payment? And number 4, why do governments not always emphasize value for money in utilizing tax revenue? Now, these are issues that we have seen across the entire world anytime there's discussion of taxation. So now, in my own thinking, and I tried at that instance to proceed some responses to those questions. Why won't people voluntarily comply with tax regulations? So number 1 is the fact that people have this perception that taxation is expanding access to more funds for corrupt enrichment. We've had this not only in Africa and Middle East, and also in the Americas, especially South America, a number of the countries there. And that, of course, connects to the fact that there's no social compact. Social compact means I pay my taxes according to statutes. In return, I see what government is doing that is impacting my life. Of course, so we also make reference to little or no consequence for non-compliance, which means if I don't comply, I don't have anything to lose. And so we'll even say, look, I have no business with any government entity. So therefore, if I don't pay, there's no gate at which anybody will ask for evidence of compliance. Of course, there's also the issue of high tax incidents and burden, which of course came in the intro that Mr. Ria made earlier on. Of course, we talked to that also later. Then generally, public goods are seen, that is roads, infrastructure of whatever kinds. So it then forces the wealthy especially to pay for private security, to pay for schooling, to pay for medical, etc. And the challenge there now is that if only the wealthy can afford those quality things, what happens to the poor? So, and that is the essence of making reference to public goods. So now, on the issue of placing revenue ahead of business facilitator when it comes to tax issues, what it points to is that we should shift focus on implications of revenue implications of tax, and also address the misconception of the developmental role of taxation. So now, let me come to these recent reforms that were designed to address most of these issues, along with the challenges we see with equity and fairness in the Nigerian tax system. Now, when it comes to tax systems, and I was privileged about 40 years ago to research this when I was a visiting doctoral student to a university in the UK. And the whole idea is that when you look at tax systems all around the world, there are certain principles that you see in there. One of them I would say is this one I mentioned now, equity and fairness means ideally your tax system should be progressive. That means the more earnings you make, the more taxes you pay. That is when it becomes fair. In which case, the burden in terms of the percentage should not be the same on the poor and the wealthy. In fact, fairness and equity will suggest that there are some people that are very much at the bottom of the pyramid that could be exempted from taxation. So that is what equity and fairness speaks to in tax systems. So now, what are the highlights of the tax reforms that we are discussing today? Now, I approach this in this way. What is the actual purpose as defined? Then what is the focus? Then we now talk about some specifics, okay? So number one, the purpose. Why these tax reforms that we are discussing today? I came across three things I can put forward as defined by the government to remove complexities in tax deduction at source, reduce the rates of deduction for sectors with low margins, provide exemptions for small businesses and manufacturers, promote the ease of tax compliance and administration, and then curb tax evasion, among other things. Now, let me give you an illustration of this. I won't mention which particular year or the particular regime, but this is something that happened to my company, a small size company. And then we had, of course, withholding tax deducted by our clients each time we provided advisory services. Now, we had this accumulated over time, which ordinarily was supposed to be applied in the settlement of our corporate income tax whenever accounts were audited and we now make our returns and pay the taxes. Then came this tax Caesar, I will put him as such, into office, and he said all the back deductions of withholding tax from the company that paid are now cancelled. And I was like, how on earth can you do that? The company made profit, declared it, now also calculated the tax implied, and now said, okay, to settle this
Do that
tax,
to me.
okay, so to do that, now to pay my tax, let me use the withholding tax receipts that our clients had paid to government. Government received the money. They issued us, receipts for tax compliance. Yet it was not allowed to be used to settle our tax obligations. Now the next thing is where is redress? Like I mentioned at the tax conference in 2019, that was 5 years ago, that any progressive tax system will also provide for redress, which means the taxpayer should have a platform where you can actually put forward your complaint. So what we then be looking out in these reforms is there any such window? Then, of course, there's also VAT impute.
Redress.
Okay. So I buy some things to do my business, service I deliver to clients. I paid VAT on them, but because I'm also a VAT collection agent, so it means that in rendering my VAT returns, there's now VAT input VAT, and also output VAT. Ideally, I should be able to claim back the input VAT, but the system until now did not provide for that. Okay. Now, the second purpose indicated is this reform will help us to codify all tax provisions into one single document to be known as the Nigerian Tax Act. In which case, having all manner of tax provisions, some so ridiculous that you only get to know them when you are traveling on the road, and some people will throw some things on the road and force you to stop, and they tell you that you are not having evidence that you pay this tax and that, and you're in the middle of nowhere where you can do practically nothing. You are helpless, okay, as it were. So, but if all of these tax provisions are codified into one single document, it becomes easy to track, both on the side of the government agencies as well as on the side of the taxpayer. Then the third one is to broaden the nation's revenue base, promote economic stability, and then reduce dependency on specific sectors like the oil sector I mentioned earlier. So the ultimate focus we found is, number one, fair taxation, and then responsible borrowing. In fact, that is the area I specialized in my doctoral research 40 years ago when I wrote on this. And that was simply to say, look, why does it make sense for companies to borrow? And of course, the basic, I will make it very simple, is that a company that borrows will have opportunity of tax credit, because when it pays interest to the bank, the interest the borrower pays to the bank is income to the bank with an expense to the borrower. So if the borrower doesn't get tax credit for that, it means the tax on anything relating to that borrowing is taken twice, which means you've taken it on the side of the payer, and you're also now taking it from the bank that received the interest as income. So we now call it simply tax deductibility of interest payment. So the question now is that it is a place within that window, number one, to make companies to be responsible in borrowing on the one hand, but as we see later, there's also a reference now to the financiers, those who provide funding, whether truly they've accounted for it, and of course, on the other hand, that when you also, as the taxpayer, is filing your return, you take account of that as part of your calculation of your tax liability. And of course, the other one is sustainable spending, which means if I now pay tax, it gives me the voice as a taxpayer to also ask for how the government is using my tax paid. So now other issues in there, this comes now to specifics. And this speaks to a number of the things you referred to at the beginning. Number one is that small businesses within the context are now exempted from withholding tax compliance, which means businesses are now defined as either small or large based on how much income or revenue they generate in a year. So the revenue generated, once it is below 25 million naira, you're exempted from withholding tax compliance. So it doesn't apply. Of course, some companies are also exempted from tax. Okay. Secondly, the rates for businesses with low margins are also reduced. So now that is the area I'm also interested in. Definition of businesses with low margins. So that can have a kind of interaction also with our own space, real estate, in which case the various services we render, what kind of margin are we looking at there? So that margin, does it make us also eligible for reduced rates, that is tax rates, depending on the nature of the tax? Then the reforms, there's exemptions. There are exemptions for manufacturers and producers such as farmers. In fact, to be more specific, the exemptions when it comes to taxes now relate to not only manufacturers and farmers, it relates to food generally, it relates to education, it relates to medicals in these tax reforms, which means those things that impact the life of the common man, that average man you see on the road, which is the basics of life, are mostly exempted from taxation in this reform, which means this reform also recognizes the fact that there is poverty, all right, that life is not only tough for the regular person, but business is also tough for the small businesses. So in my interpretation, this reform also has taken that into account. The reforms also cause measures to curb evasion and therefore minimize tax avoidance. I don't know about any of us here, but I've made an observation that nowadays there's a link between my NIN, that's my national identification number, and my BVN, which relates to my banking and finance activities, and now my TIN, that is my tax identification number. So that, in my own view, is a reform that narrows the window for tax evasion, and of course also minimizes tax avoidance. There are two different things. Tax evasion is criminal. Tax avoidance is deliberate. Deliberate in the sense that, let me use one to illustrate. If a bottle of water, let's say for the sake of discussion, is VATable, that is, there is VAT on it. If I want to avoid that VAT, I simply will not buy that bottled water. That way, I avoid the VAT that is on that product. Now, that is tax avoidance. So it can be done by that deliberate choice, or I do business and I study very well the tax provisions and I identify areas where if I do business in that line, I will get some tax rebates, and I choose to do that. That way, I can avoid tax. Okay, so it can be what part of what we call in corporate planning as tax planning. So it can be done deliberately, but it is not illegal. That's tax avoidance. But the whole idea now is that in these reforms, the focus also is to curb evasion and also minimize as much as possible tax avoidance. Then also to ease obtaining credit and the utilization of tax deducted at source. Then the changes are also to reflect emerging issues and then adopt global best practices. And that is where, I find some interesting references people make. We have seen that there's going to be an increase in the rate of VAT, that is value-added tax. No, we don't want that. And I told myself, look, there are two things to consider here. Number one is the fact that if these reforms will harmonize all taxes, that means taxes you pay to local governments, taxes you pay to state government, taxes you pay to federal government, and everything is now codified. Now, in order to prevent pushback, which unfortunately is happening now, and politically motivated, that's my view. I believe strongly that the pushback we are seeing now is all about politics. There's nothing more to it. But they are strictly a tax, analyst, researcher, and for those who are practitioners. The clarity here is that if you don't need to pay, let's say pay for radio to a local government, or pay for TV in your house to a local government. And so that particular payment is dropped completely. All right. Now, ordinarily, local governments around Nigeria will protest 774 of them. in the constitution. The process says, this reform is taking revenue away from us. Then that says, look, what we do is what you are losing there, we give it back to you by increasing VAT a little. And then we also tinker with the distribution of VAT to be more in favor of local and state governments and take something away from the federal government. But that's what this reform I observe has done. So if we do that, local and state government, you have nothing to lose. In fact, some of those taxes we are now, advocating that you drop and start charging will now be compensated for your larger share from the VAT revenue to start with. And then also we have a measure of increase in the VAT rate. That's on one side. But if you now want to go global and say, okay, what happens around the world? Fact is that VAT in Nigeria is perhaps the lowest in the whole of African region. That's Africa. So, and it is easy to say, oh, well, what is going on in other countries? Even some smaller countries with smaller economies are charging much higher. That's on the one side. Now, at times also, we say, look, how about the oil-producing countries? Nigeria is among the top 6, okay, in OPEC. And of course, even globally, we are in the top 10. You know, say, why should we increase the VAT rate? Well, I say, look, my friend, don't push it too hard and too far. Saudi Arabia is perhaps a market, let me say, a market maker in the oil market. Saudi Arabia increased VAT from 5% to 15% July this year. So that is just by the way, because the idea is that any item that has VAT as a tax component cannot be avoided except the person doesn't consume that product or service. So VAT, therefore, is difficult to avoid. So it is therefore more convenient in terms of the revenue to generate and also impact. And of course, there's also need for clarity on the timing of deduction and then a clear definition of key terms, which means if you go from one local government to another, you shouldn't be dealing with a tax by a certain name here, which you can relate to what is called in other local government. Same thing at the state level, which means subnationals and national. The same terminologies in taxation is what you'll be dealing with, the same understanding. Now, what is the scope? And this is where it is interesting. I have just a few more things to say now. They'll bring it home. And then we can do conversations. All right? Now, taxes are deductible. Taxes deductible at source from payments to taxable persons are defined under the Capital Gains Tax Act, and we talk about that for real estate, Companies Income Tax Act, that is for corporate entities, or let me say profit-seeking entities, and then the Petroleum Profits Tax Act and the Personal Income Tax Act. So all those taxes deductible at source are now clearly defined, all right? So it becomes the same uniform definition and understanding throughout the Nigerian tax territory. Secondly, the scope also covers transactions that are exempt from deduction at source, and they include goods manufactured or materials produced by persons making supply, imported goods where the transaction does not create a taxable presence in Nigeria for the foreign supplier. In which case, there's a foreign supplier that has an office here in Nigeria. By all means, that foreign supplier is treated as a registered business. So the taxes applicable then will be the entire gamut as defined in our Tax Act. But if the foreign supplier is not based in Nigeria, and then that particular good is imported, in which case that entity doesn't have taxable presence in Nigeria, then it will be also exempted from tax. So others are compensating payments under a registered securities lending transaction. That's where REITs come in, all right? In line with Section 81, subsection 8 of the Companies Income Tax Act, then any distribution or dividend payment to a real estate investment trust or real estate investment company as provided under Section 80, subsection 5 of the Companies Income Tax Act, that's the one that concerns us, or across the counter transactions as defined under these regulations.
For having a conversation on tax reform, blah, 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 with doctor, so that we know what is going on.
All right, interest and fees paid to a Nigerian bank by way of direct debit of the funds which are domiciled with the bank. Of course, there are other snippets which are very interesting. And this is where...
Sorry, doctor, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, doctor, doctor. Thank you. Doctor, you can continue. Continue. I know some people are joining us. They want to know who is speaking with us, but I have decided that you have to finish your presentation before I can do any introduction.
All right. Thank you very much, Sadibayo. All right. So now this is where it's getting a lot more interesting. And that is, I call them snippets. And there are 4 of them I picked out here. Number 1 is that VAT distribution will take into account the place of supply or consumption for relevant goods and services, whether they are zero rated, exempt, or taxable at the standard rate. For example, a state that is a subnational that produces food shouldn't lose out just because its products are VAT exempt or consumed in other states. The state where the supply originates should be recognized for its contributions. That is what I referred to earlier as fairness. All right. Of course, the tax reforms also provide for increase, as I mentioned earlier, in the share of states and local governments in VAT revenue from 85 to 90%. So in which case, you can call it compensation for all those taxes, levies, and whatever that the states and local governments have to draw in the course of this harmonization. All right. If they stop charging those levies, those fees, and all manner of things that in the real sense of it we refer to as taxes. So what will they get in return? And that's why I said 2 ways to look at that. Increase in VAT rate, not insignificant, but also the VAT revenue collected federally, that we get a greater share of that than they are currently getting, which is the increase of 85% to 90%. Now comes the issue of progressive nature of tax systems. And that means people that earn more should pay more. So in this reform, there's a proposal that earnings from 100 million and above will attract tax rate of 25%. But this has been misinterpreted generally to mean that there's an increase in the tax rate. The increase in tax rate is applicable to the wealthy. And that's the way it is all over the world. So if we are going to talk of reform, therefore, it cannot be complete without this particular provision. What the provision says is that if you earn at a level below certain figure, you won't even pay tax at all. If your earning is above 100 million naira, then your tax rate should be 25%. So that's the progressive nature of taxation all over the world in tax systems. All right. Of course, I've talked about harmonized disparate taxes, that is money taxes, to be compensated with increase in VAT. So let's come home so that we can now go into Q&A. What are the implications of the reforms for real estate stakeholders? That's the way I put it. And I identify the stakeholders in 3 categories. The first category, real estate brokers. And of course, I didn't take into account here developers, because for developers, they are basically in business. So all basic rules relating to corporate income tax, we apply to them. And of course, the provisions of withholding tax deductions and the rest of them. Now, so that's why where I have brokers will apply to anybody within the build space who is doing business as registered business. Number 1, just 3 things I pull out there. Number 1 is that withholding tax deductions and remittance are now gazetted with applicable rates. It's an official gazette issued, Gazette number 168, volume 111 of 2nd of October 2024. So the rates are already gazetted, all right? But there's also a provision in the reforms that talks about payment of capital gains tax should be made within the 10th day of the succeeding month. And why I pick this out is because somebody bought a property for, let's say, 25 million, just for the sake of compensation. Then in terms of expenses, let's say about 7.5 million to renovate it. That brings the cost to 32.5 million. We now put it in the market and sold it for 42 million. 45 million. Now, that's a 12.5 million difference between the cost of acquisition, the cost of renovation, which came to, 32.5 million, and now the sale price of 45 million. So the difference between them is 12.5 million. That 12.5 million will be capital gains tax. That's the way it is done traditionally anyway. But what this reform now says is that when that happens, the capital gains tax on that transaction should be paid not later than the 10th day of November, assuming the transaction was done in October. That means between 1st and 10th of November, the capital gains tax should be paid. But the tax rate is now specified in the Gazette issued on the 2nd of October this year. And that is in a schedule that is attached. That schedule is very clear, and but let me just make reference to it. Now, what it says is that, okay, you have also brokerage fee. Let me just mention that, because I made reference now to real estate brokers. Brokerage fees. If the recipient is corporate, that means the applicable brokerage fee is 5% for a resident. But if the recipient is resident outside Nigeria, that means is a non-resident, as we call it, then the applicable brokerage fee is 10%. So what these new reforms has done is to separate between those who live in Nigeria and those who live outside Nigeria, and then separate also between corporate recipients and non-corporate. Assuming the property I mentioned, for example, okay, was personal to me, then a non-corporate recipient rate will apply. But assuming the property in question was bought by my company, renovated, and now sold, then the rates applicable will be under corporate. So, and all of these are now clearly defined. So there's no ambiguity. That's one point I want to bring out here. Equally, if, let's say, Mr. Adebayo's company, all right, bought some materials, and on those materials, VAT was included. We call that input VAT. The reform now says that Mr. Adebayo's company can actually claim that input VAT within 30 days. If all documentations are presented to the tax authorities, they should refund that to you within 30 days. So that is now a provision in the new act, proposed. Or let me say the bill for now, okay? Then for real estate investors, there's nothing significantly that changes there, except if you're an investor in the real estate.
Proposed for now, the bill.
So that the money you are making from that is greater than 100 million on the bracket. That is when you will feel the impact of the tax. Of course, for real estate financiers, it's about withholding tax remittance. So these are my closing thoughts before we go into conversations. And I put them in 7. 1, there's no doubt for me that several reform elements are well intended and should bring improvement to the tax system and strengthen the tax culture in Nigeria. That's why I started from that. Secondly, the reforms fail to give particular attention to the real estate sector, given its strategic role in the Nigerian economy and its sustainable economic development. I say this because of what is happening in some other, jurisdictions, that's tax jurisdictions, that if we want to recognize the key role of real estate sector in the economy, and that in fact, it is also more important than the financial sector, and this is based on evidence-based research. of over 100 years now of data that the impact of real estate sector that weakens is twice that of a collapse of the finance sector. Okay, that's financial sector. Number three, elimination of money taxation, or at least significant reduction in the number of taxes across national and sub-national will improve the business climate. Number four, in my own view, the pushback on the reforms that resulted in recommendation, okay, of the withdrawal of the tax reform bills for the National Assembly is basically for three reasons. Which was why I said several things. Number one is that the three northern geopolitical, zones consider that the proposed change to VAT distribution formula will not favor them. That's my thinking. Okay, so that is political. Secondly, the increase in VAT rate to compensate for taxes that will be eliminated. People have not also taken that into consideration. When they are looking at it, they look at the state level. So I won't be able to collect these taxes again because of this harmonization. But they have forgotten that within the same context, there's a proposal to increase allocation to states and local governments, and at the same time increase VAT a little. Number three, and this has been my very strong argument over years, that the elite that will become more impacted by the progressive tax structure are the one also driving this pushback and resistance. So, and I think that is the element of progressive taxation that most actors in Nigeria are not comfortable with. So I will leave it there for now so that we can take questions and comments in context of the time for this event. Thank you very much.
Yes, this is a very, very educative and very impactful presentation from our own Dr. Abiodun Adedipe. Thank you for enlightening me, your host, to start with. And thank you for the kind of value you have brought in at this crucial, very important time. I appreciate the way you x-ray the bill that is still waiting, that has subjected to a lot of political here and there.
Yeah.
It's very okay. I know questions have started coming in on our TV site and on the social media.
Yeah.
But I would like to start with people like me that promote affordable housing.
Okay.
And for years now, I've been requesting for tax waivers for people who are interested in developing low-cost housing, affordable housing.
That's right.
And also seek for some tax holiday, on some building materials that we are using.
Yeah.
As you can see, the way building is collapsing here and there. You can't rule it out that building materials is one of the causes, the poor standard of the building materials. So on that note, I would like to ask that question. What provision does this new bill make for those promoting, delivering, or building social housing?
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that the tax is very progressive this time around. The bigger boys are going to pay big, and the small boys are going to pay small, and some guys will not even pay at all. Yeah. So on that note, I need to ask, how can people also get value? People pay tax most of the time in Nigeria, and they cannot get value. Yeah. What assurance is in the bill that Mr. President is going to sign that we make us to question if we don't get value. So let us start with that two questions. Why I'm collecting more questions from the stakeholders that I will push to you. So I want you to start with this one.
All right, thank you very much. Now, you notice when I did my review, I mentioned the first question you asked there. And I said the reforms did not go specific to recognize the important role of the real estate sector in economic development. Because if it really did, they should have seen a reference to some provisions, exemptions that relate especially to affordable housing. Because that really, again, as you say, is what relates to the bottom of the pyramid. So, and it means inputs within that space, and also even the output itself should be designed in such a way that there are tax breaks and there are tax, exemptions and other provisions that will not only make it attractive for investors to go into that space, number one, and also even make it attractive for those that let me say, off-takers of the, assets, as well as those who want to even treat the assets as an investment asset, okay? Because people go into real estate, either looking at the assets for investment purposes, or they're looking at it as per owner-occupier. In fact, when you look at this across different countries, you find that it's a range of between 60-40%. 60% for those who buy properties to occupy, and about 40% for those who buy in order to invest, see it as an investment asset. So whichever way it goes, the tax provisions should take account of those various stakeholders. And I don't yet see that in this, which means there is still space for players in the real estate sector to go into advocacy while these bills are being discussed. Because at some point, whenever they are brought back, they will still be subjected to, public hearing. And so we should also get our own advocacy ready, especially in this regard. Now, the second question, we normally describe it as social compact, which is here we pay taxes, but what does government do with our taxes? Now, interestingly, it's a global phenomenon. If as we speak, it's an issue in the US, it's an issue in UK as we speak, because there's a whole lot of debate on the budget of UK for the next financial year. All right. So now this essentially says that we can't make a provision in the tax law as to how government will spend the proceeds of tax. All that the provisions in the Act can deal with is, number one, how the taxes are defined, how they will be collected, who will collect them, then how it will be shared. That's what the Tax Act can deal with. That's why we refer to the other side to it as social compact, in which case that comes from the government itself. That when people put money in my hand, I must have the conscience and ask myself, what do I do in return for the people? So that's why we call it social compact. It's like a contract, but it's a contract that's not legally documented. That's why I use the word conscience. So in which case, the more people can relate with what you are doing with the process of taxes collected, the more they'll be willing to comply voluntarily. Because that's the key word when it comes to tax systems. Voluntary contribution. Not that you mandate and force them, but that they want to voluntarily contribute. So which is what reform should be all about. So as you are reforming the tax system, we should also think back on what to do with the money. Which means cost consciousness and also cost productivity. That's the way I like putting it. Your cost is productive. You are not just spending money for the sake of spending. But what value is your spending creating for the society? So very, very important. So thank you. We can take other questions. Okay. All right. there is something in the chat box. How can the people monitor the implementation of the tax relief and ensure that it is going to benefit the real estate sector? Now, when you make reference to tax relief, it's actually about the taxpayer, because the payer that receives the relief, all right? So, but I would rather interpret it this way, because I'm trying to relate the two parts to this question. But the first part says monitoring the implementation of tax relief. The second one says ensure that it's going to benefit the real estate sector. So it means the first one is monitor relief. And that means what is government giving out, or in terms of, put it this way, that if the government gives relief for a particular item, how much is now ceded to the taxpayer that the taxpayer doesn't need to pay to government? That's my interpretation of relief in tax language. Now, if that happens, let's say into the real estate sector, so the benefit then will be how that sector grows, which means, take for example now, the relief coming in this reform to those in agric, in manufacturing, in education, in medicals, if they receive all this relief, ideally, it should mean that school fees, for example, will not be increased inordinately. Because if you're in the education sector and you are getting relief, that means you should not increase your school fees. Equally in the provision, if food is now exempted from VAT, what will be your reason for increasing, anyhow, we call it price gouging, for increasing the price of the food items that you sell? So the same thing will now apply if I'm in real estate and there's now a relief provided for real estate investors, and whatever within that space. What will that make me to do? If a developer, let's say, for example, gets relief, what should that imply in terms of the cost of the units that he or she is delivering? Which comes back to what Mr. Adebayo said earlier on. Okay? So it then means the houses become affordable because there is relief for those that are developing those affordable housing. That's the way it's supposed to be. So, but it now brings it back to us also. Those who are developing the affordable housing, if there's relief, we then factor the relief into the eventual pricing of those assets. Will they truly be affordable? That's the way I interpret your question. So it means on both sides, there's a commitment to the purpose of that tax reform. Thank you.
Would they really put it there? Would they really make the houses affordable if there's a relief? That's a good question.
That's it.
All right. I have many other questions. Yeah. Now, I have more questions here. Let me just be reading them. VAT exceptions. How will the VAT exception on essential goods and services, such as transportation and construction materials, influence cost in real estate development and housing development? I think that question has partially been answered. But doctor, we look into it.
Okay.
Another question is, how do the new reforms impact individuals living in Nigeria versus those living outside the country, the diaspora people? Okay. That's a question. Another question, I don't know. I wish they can just put this question in the chat for doctor to be reading them one by one. Will there be changes in how real estate investment trust REITs are taxed? And how might this affect investors? Will these tax reforms likely lead to more stable property prices or lower rents, benefiting both developers? I don't understand. Doctor, my own is this. Before you go to the questions, the situation in Nigeria today is a little bit ash. The inflation is very terrible. Majority of the people are only looking for what to eat. On that note, how is this tax reform going to be possible in the area of implementation with this type of environment that is very hostile? I think it was on our WhatsApp group this morning. I read about even Lagos State is using building approval as a way of generating revenue. If everything just generating revenue, how will Nigerians survive? Dr. Adedipe, up to you.
All right, thank you very much. Now, from my observation, because we are all outsiders to government, okay? But what we see here is that there are a lot of exemptions coming with these reforms, which means if you're a low-income earner, practically you are not even paying taxes. But the moment you can afford to develop a property, you can't claim to be a poor person any longer. And I'll give you a simple illustration. Now, one of the drivers, around me, I asked him one day, "Are you a poor man?" He said, "Yes, he's a poor man." And I asked him, "Who told you you're a poor man?" He said, "I'm a poor man now." I said, "Okay, you know what? Let me give you an understanding of dealing with poverty, which unfortunately is what we've made a common understanding of it in Nigeria." I said, "This is the way you should look at this. In the house where you live now, isolated property." He said, "Yes." Good. Now, do you have, seats in your living room? He said, "Of course." So now let's assume that you need money in an emergency and you have to sell your chairs. How much will you likely realize for it? He gave an amount. I said, "Write it down." "Do you have television in your house?" He said, "Yes." "If you have to sell it, we call it either forced sale or fire sale. How much will you like to get for it?" He told me, "Write it down." "Do you have beds in your bedroom?" He said, "Yes." He does. I said, "Okay, fine. Now, do you have any other things in your house, like fridge, freezer, and whatever?" He said, "Yes." Put the values on the ground. So by the time you put all those things together, I said, "Add them up." Of course, was already talking about almost 3 million naira. I said, so now the misinterpretation, which unfortunately we have put that narrative so far to label Nigeria as the poverty capital of the world erroneously, is that people think they are not poor. Think they are poor if they don't have cash of 1 million naira at hand to spend. And I said, it's a misinterpretation of the way we measure wealth. Wealth is measured based on net worth. That means all the assets you have, we value them and we write it down. And then we look at the other side. Do you have any property? The one you live in, is it your own? If you say yes, we call that your primary residence. And that property is owned by you. So we remove that, the value of that from the value of all your assets put together. Then I ask you, do you owe any money? If you owe any money, we subtract it from that figure. Whatever remains, if it is positive, then your net worth is positive. You can't claim to be poor. And I told him that poverty is not the fact that you don't have 1 million naira cash. It is the fact that there are some daily needs you have that you are unable to meet. If those basic needs you cannot meet them, they can now begin to see you as a poor person who needs humanitarian intervention. But that very day, that man's mindset changed. I said, so you are actually a rich man, but what you own is tied up in assets variously. The same man later, today is a landlord, okay? Because I got him to say at the point that, look, because you need money to buy food, you want to sell your land in the Ikorodu. I persuaded him not to sell the land. Today he has built it up. He's now a landlord himself and occupying that building. So and I said, oftentimes, when you bring the issue of inflation, it affects everybody to start with, all right? But in this instance, if you look at the reform, that's my interpretation anyway, because I'm not a part of the committee, neither am I in government. But my interpretation is that there are a lot of things in there that have changed the way I have seen the tax system in Nigeria in the last 40 years. I've been researching and working within that space, okay? So there are improvements that recognize that some people are poor, therefore completely exempt them from tax. But the moment you can put money together and buy land and build a house, you can't say you are poor. We should begin now to see what you own as assets vis-a-vis your income, How can somebody who earns 100 million naira per month pay tax at the same rate with somebody who earns 200,000 naira in a month? That is unfair, all right? So, and those are some of the things addressed in this reform from what I read, okay? So in which case, it's a situation where for the poor, and those at the bottom of the pyramid, for companies also that are micro, they are exempted from tax. I think that is a good place to start from in terms of improving the tax, space in Nigeria. Thank you very much for that. Now, one other interesting thing I've seen here is what I mentioned earlier. What these reforms now has done is to distinguish between residents and non-residents. If you are resident here, yes, you pay tax at a certain rate. If you are non-resident, you pay more. That is the way it is in tax systems around the world. We are not alone in this matter. So, and of course, let me now go back to the chat board because that's where most of the questions are. So, will these tax reforms likely lead to more stable property prices or lower rents? Well, unfortunately, when it talks about prices of properties and rent, it's in the hands of the owners. Unfortunately, it's not in the hand of government. All the government can do is to encourage you to build in at least a cheaper way or take some burden that you carry along that process away from you. But when it comes to pricing of properties, when it comes to determining rents, it's basically in the hand of the asset owners. The best the government can do, for example, is to say, look, instead of demanding for rent, which Lagos State government did a couple of years back, all right? Instead of demanding for 2 years rent, people now, by regulation, should be asked to pay only 1 year rent in advance. Okay? Maybe to make that better, in the light of what Mr. Adewale raised earlier on, okay? We might now say, let's also now start promoting people paying rent monthly. Because if inflation is making rent to become unaffordable, we might now say, okay, to make it affordable, let's bring it down to monthly rent payment, as is actually done at the bottom of the pyramid. Another question there talks about, okay, yeah, a breakthrough provision on rates and the records. That's I mentioned that in passing. Thank you for that. Now, how do the new reforms impact individual living in Nigeria versus those living outside Nigeria? I've talked about that. The prevention is quite clear. Just Google it to get the Gazette I mentioned earlier on of 2nd of October this year. Is there tabulated now as part of the new provisions? Then incentives for affordable housing. Are there specific incentives or reliefs? I don't see any in there because I've mentioned that also earlier. So that's why I said when the bills are brought back and they are brought forward for, public, interrogation, let's get ready, those of us in this sector, to also advocate for what needs to be changed there to connect to our own space. And don't forget, in your space, you are not fighting for yourself. What you're asking for will affect all Nigerians. You must be able to make that case very clear so that what you are bringing in will not be seen as a selfish advocacy, but rather an advocacy that work through you to benefit the generality of Nigerians, especially the lower income and the disappearing middle income, what they call the middle class. Then, of course, will there be changes in how real estate investment trusts are taxed and how might this impact investors? There are no changes really because the key things there are two things. One is the company itself, that's the rate code, or which is subject to CIT. The other one is the investors in the rate, which simply is about the share, the dividend that they receive. The provision in the Finance Act of 2020 still subsists because there's no reference to a change in that, which means that within 1 year, all right, if I say within 6 months, although there are still some contentions around that, but there are 75% of the dividend, of the dividend, yes, should be paid to shareholders. That one is still subsisting because I look for it in the bills, and I didn't see any specific reference to that. Then any distribution made under is exempt, yes, from a source, yes, that's correct. That's correct, yes. What incentive do we have in the proposed bills to ensure a reduction in the cost of development? especially in the depressed economy, where no specific, provision is there. To the best of my knowledge, when I went through it, but essentially, and I mentioned that earlier, that should become part of our own advocacy, why the bills are subject to discussion before eventually becomes finalized and becomes a law. Okay, yeah, this is a repeat of what I saw earlier. I mean, it's a good development because what it now says is the cycle is completed for those asset classes as transparent flow through entities. So, and of course, that should enhance the growth of rates and also facilitate capital raising by real estate development. I mean, 100% correct interpretation there. So I think those are the questions in the chat box. So unless there are fresh ones. Okay, incremental self-building is one of the most affordable routes to home ownership and what you by many. Indeed, I did the same too. I mean, I own a property that took how many years now? 13 years to deliver. So from when I laid the foundation to when tenants came into the commercial property, 13 years. That's incremental building. I agree with you there. It's in the chat box. Okay. Yeah. All right. So now, okay, the question part now says, what provision can the government introduce as part of the current tax reform to support people who are building their own homes through this method? Again, it is something we can pick up as part of our advocacy in response. Bills are actually proposals. I think we must understand it that way. It's not yet law. It's a proposal. Even when the National Assembly is done with it, until the president signs it, because it's an executive bill. I mean, they are executive bills. Until the president signs them, they don't become law, which means we still have space to intervene and raise all these issues. So what we should do from this conversation today is identify areas where we see the bill has not given any clear indication that impacts real estate. But all of that, that's why I started my presentation on the significance of the sector to the economy. That's the thing to put forward. Once you put that forward, they will now bring all of these issues. These are the realities of our environment. Okay, so I think this is an issue that qualifies for advocacy here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adedipe. The Housing Development Advocacy Network has started the conversation on how we can make necessary input into this bill.
Yeah.
We are going to come together, call more of our leading stakeholders to be interested before this bill is passed into law.
Yeah.
And then let me use this opportunity to invite one of our leaders in the housing industry, Reverend Akim Oguniro, to make a brief remark on your presentation today. I've seen one of the, I think I've seen one of the messages sent commending what you said. So we'd like to invite him to please say a statement to you on this presentation, on this conversation.
Good morning. Are you hearing me, Festus? Good afternoon. Good morning, doctor.
Please, can they get Akim Oguniro for me?
I'm already on. Are you hearing me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Oh, fantastic.
I can hear you.
Oh, good morning, doctor, and well done for...
Yes. Yes,
well done
yes,
for,
yes, yes.
Well done for a fantastic presentation as usual. We're not surprised. Once we saw the notice, we all knew that we were coming here to learn today. So it's been a very enlightening journey for me. I've lived
But I can't hear him. They want me to put, yeah, they wanted to put this camera, please. Because we're on television, so we need to see you in the bigger way. We're on TV. We need to see you in a bigger way. Okay. Thank you, sir. Is there any network problem? Huh? Network is bad. Okay. Yeah. While we are waiting. Well, okay. I think there's a network problem in that area. So all these things have to be edited, please. I think it's a network problem from his end. All right. Now, while we are waiting for Mr. Akim Oguniro, there's need to emphasize that much has been said by our guest for today on the good aspect of this bill. He has also told us what we need, charged us on what to do, and that as we have started the conversation today, the conversation should be continued and should be taken to other level. In fact, we will take the conversation to the Ministry of Housing, Federal Ministry of Housing, to join us as we make our own inputs to the bill in such a way that the bill can also take care of those developers that may be interested in affordable social housing. Why? We have not seen him. He's not there. So maybe.
I'm here. I've been waiting.
Yes, yes, come. Please, Mr. Kim is here now.
I've been waiting
so we
to
can
be
let
on.
him speak. Mr. Kim is here. Let him speak so that we can round up the program.
Thank you very much. I've been waiting to be unmuted. I was just congratulating Doctor for a brilliant presentation and for touching all the critical touch points as they affect our industry. I've already made my comment on the chart, which is around, the area that is very dear to my heart, which is the area of REITs and RECOs. One of the things you will see through this reform is that anytime reference is made to distributions or payment of dividends, distributions by REITs and RECOs are exempted. And I was specifically looking out for that because I know that at the beginning of this, in those days, Taiwo was part of us doing the advocacy for against double taxation, because the challenge has always been that if you tax distribution at the ends of the entity end, and you then tax again in the hands of the REIT holders, it amounts to double taxation. That the regulators did not understand for a long time. But I think that with this reform, and with the reform that already started in the Tax Act in 2020, I think we now have a complete cycle. So we now have a framework, a legal framework for REITs and RECOs, which is wholly compliant with best class, because it's supposed to be a transparent flow-through investment vehicle. So I think all the challenges that we used to face in the past, I think those who come to the market now, they will not face those challenges. You don't have to start going through the back door, creating a DOT as we had done in the past. And I think that's a major breakthrough for the real estate sector. Of course, I agree with Doctor that there are no detailed incentivized tax provisions specifically dedicated to the sector. And that's why I think we need to focus our.
Yes.
That's all for me.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, my leader. You are always on point, and want to appreciate you for joining this discussion. And there you are tasking you now that you are going to join us in taking this conversation to many other places. We are going to engage the members of the National Assembly, the committee, in the House of Reps and that of the Senate, and also the Senate President and the House of Reps. Thank you to Dr. Adedipe, who has opened our eyes to see this clearly, and then we have to pursue it for the interest of the generality of members in the sector. Yes, this is how far we can go on this conversation today. But before I go, let me hear the last response from our guests, Dr. Biodu Adedipe, before I say a very big thank you to him for joining the conversation.
All right, thank you so very much, Mr. Adebayo. My final take this morning is that when it comes to advocacy, you don't give up, but you have that reflected in the statutes. And as rightly said, all the necessary, stakeholders should be a part of this process. And of course, your targets also you rightly identified. So anyone that can influence the final outcome should be your target in terms of audience. So you engage them and also share this with them to understand how important your sector is to the economy. And in fact, we're ensuring that the economy is stable, that it grows sustainably, it grows also in a sustained manner, and grows in an inclusive manner. So that is what my final take would be. Thank you so very much for having me this morning. Okay. Yeah.
Dr. Adedipe, thank you. I think it was my friend Nancy that spoke about you to me. And I told her that I've already hijacked you, and I'm going to put you, that you're going to be part of HDAN. Why? Because almost all our senior in the housing industry know you, they appreciate you, and I have told her that you are going to lead our any discussion we are having on housing. Everybody must know that you are the official economist for Nigeria housing industry. So we want to say a very big thank you. Hope to see you again anytime we call you and that you will respond to us. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you so very much.
And click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates. Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts